with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Matt Duss, Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy, and Gregg Gonsalves, Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Yale University. Duss will be speaking about our current foreign policy mess and how much messier it's going to get. And Gonsalves will be talking about what's going to happen to public health under a regime of Robert Kennedy and Dr. Oz. Meanwhile, U.S. and other countries closed their Kyiv embassies in anticipation of a Russian air attack in response to Ukrainian missile shot into Russia. There's a vote today for conditioning military aid to Israel, or I should say curbing military aid to Israel in the Senate. Meanwhile, in the Security Council, the U.S. vetoes an unconditional Gaza ceasefire resolution. Bomb cyclone slams West Coast. Now new report of climate change added 18 miles per hour to hurricanes in the past 5 years. Lyndon McMahon, totally lacking in any expertise in education, nominated for Education Secretary with an agenda to privatize public schooling. Meanwhile, Dr. Oz nominated with an agenda to privatize Medicare as the MMS nominee. Matt Gaetz, nominee for top law enforcement official in the U.S., Venmoed over $10,000 to two women who were witnesses in his House ethics probe as that committee meets today about releasing that report. Former LGBTQ supporter Nancy Mace fears for women because trans people exist in Congress. No word on the predators chosen for Trump's cabinet. Democrats in Senate managed to confirm 3 lifetime judicial appointments last night. Forward over a dozen more thanks to vacationing J.D. Vance. And New York Senator Crypto Gillibrand has been named Democratic Senate Campaign Committee Chair, or very well may be, I should say. And lastly, the House to attempt another vote on H.R. 9495, which will give Trump power to shut down nonprofits. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Hump Day. Emma's out today. We got a lot to get to. Let me just start off by apologizing. In my tone to one of our callers yesterday, I was a little bit aggressive, but these days we're all a little bit on edge. But understand, what we want this space to be. At this moment anyways. And that is to sort of get out of the shock of losing, because we don't have too much time to wallow in that, frankly. And the idea is, how can we in some way slow the roll of this administration? And I, for one, do not believe that we're going to see any of Donald Trump's nominees fail to become the either head of those agencies or cabinet positions or acting. Here is Congressman Jim McGovern from Worcester, Mass. Longtime good guy. Here he is talking and this is before I think Dr. Oz was nominated for CMMS, and even maybe McMahon for Secretary of Education. Incidentally, go back and watch Josh Cowan if you didn't watch that interview we did on Monday. If you want to know, this person is picked specifically to privatize education through vouchers, or what they call school choice. But here's Jim McGovern on the floor of the House yesterday.
And their cabinet picks so far, I mean, these are like beyond insane. Someone who is credibly accused of having sex with an underage girl. Someone who sucks up to foreign dictators and has attracted major concern that they can't be trusted to protect America's secrets from our adversaries. Someone who paid hush money to cover up a sexual assault accusation, to lead our military. He's picked because Donald Trump likes him on Fox News. Someone who says that tap water turns kids gay. I mean, this is the dream team? This is the dream team? Really? I mean, seriously, it would be funny if it weren't so sad. And hopefully, the United States Senate has a backbone and insists on a thorough confirmation process.
All right, folks, hope springs eternal, but don't count on it. We're already seeing, folks like John Fetterman talk about Dr. Oz, who he called a complete, and we'll go through this later, but we've already seen, we're just watching it on a daily basis. Morning Joe, John Fetterman, you have people who are basically saying, if I capitulate now, maybe it'll be more lucrative for me, more politically beneficial. Who knows what their motivations are? But understand this, and I still am convinced this is the way it's going to go down. Trump is going to ask Jim Thune who can get past the Senate. And the ones that can't are going to be put in 3 days after the Senate convenes. Trump is going to say, you're going on vacation. Or you're going to watch the House essentially vote to adjourn. The Senate will not take it up. Trump will use his constitutional authority to say the Senate must also adjourn because there's a dispute between the two. The Senate could come back the next day in a recess. Remember, has to be 10 days long, according to the Supreme Court. Now, that very well may change. And he's going to appoint these people to it. And if you don't believe me, how about Trump's budding Eichmann, Stephen Miller, on Hannity last night?
If there are some cabinet appointments that become troublesome, will the president use the recess appointment process?
Yes. The president has won a mandate, and he will use all lawful constitutional means to fulfill that mandate on behalf of the people who voted for him in record numbers.
All right.
Now, we should be clear. Donald Trump doesn't have a mandate, but he doesn't need one. And I think we're so far past the days where you have to pretend that there's some type of mandate. He is not doing this because he got a mandate. It is, regardless, and it could even actually be closer, the closest margin in the House in the history of this country. He has won the presidency with the smallest popular vote margin in history, or I think in 50 years, maybe it's been. He will win the presidency without achieving 50% of the votes. I think that was probably 30 years ago. Aside from, the Electoral College. There's no mandate here, but he doesn't need one. This game of whether there's a mandate or not is irrelevant. The bottom line is he's going to figure out a way to recess appointment. It will protect the Republican senators. They will pretend like they have nothing to do with this, even though they could easily inhibit this. Even if the House votes to recess, they could easily inhibit this by going on recess, adjourning, and then just coming back. But they won't do that. One of the biggest, drums I've been beating for now 9 years, is the inability or the refusal of Democratic politicians to label Donald Trump as a Republican. So when you watch those videos where somebody says, well, I don't think he was going to ban abortion, or they project onto him some fantasies about what he's going to do. The reason why you cannot leverage what the Republican Party agenda has been for 50 or 60 years, whether it's cutting Social Security, whether it's a national abortion ban, privatizing education, privatizing healthcare. The reason why is because Democrats consciously, or our Democratic leadership consciously decided to separate Trump from Republicans. He's different than Republicans. And that ended up helping him. So
that's why he won the primary in 2016. That's why people like Ben Shapiro were helpless to stop him, saying, hey, he's not really like one of us. It's like, yeah, that's why we like him more than Ron DeSantis.
That's right.
Or Marco
but
Rubio.
At the end of the day, he's just a vessel for the Republican Party.
Right.
Project 2025. And the reason why that was so effective of a tool to use, despite the fact that when that was sort of like deployed, we had a candidate who couldn't even seem to articulate the first three sentences of that. The reason why it was so effective, because it was basically saying, here's the agenda that you don't want. And Trump is a vehicle for it. That's it.
Like Grover Norquist the first time around.
Exactly. All I need is a pulse and an ability to sign, legislation. That's it. All right. In a moment, we're going to talk to Matt Duss, Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy, about what's going on, particularly with that vote that we're going to see today in the Senate, what kind of chances it has, how Joe Biden's administration is furiously trying to whip votes against it. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then later, Gregg Gonsalves on what's going to happen to public health under a RFK Jr. Dr. Oz regime. First off, one of our sponsors today, this is important, and there's very few things, these days that you can do today that's going to knock some anxiety off your list. But this is one of them. And that is your family's financial future with life insurance through SelectQuote. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. They've been doing this for 40 years. Is that 40 years? Yeah, 40 years. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. And if you've ever worried about getting coverage with pre-existing health conditions, SelectQuote partners with carriers that provide policies for a variety of health conditions. High blood pressure, no problem. Diabetes, that's fine too. Even if you have heart disease, SelectQuote partners with carriers that can cover those conditions or others. Or if you don't have any major health issues, they work with carriers that can get you same-day coverage with no medical exam required. Folks, important thing to do, particularly obviously you have kids or a spouse. I got term life insurance now. Well, I got some almost 18 years ago. Maybe it was 17 with Mila. I was worried about it, and I kept putting it off. And I eventually got it. And then when Saul was born, I got a little bit more just in case. And it's insurance. It makes you feel like in the worst case scenario, your family is covered. Head to selectquote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/majority. Go to selectquote.com/majority today to get started at selectquote.com/majority. Also, one of the other things that I've taken at least some control over these days, you got to hold on to that white-knuckled. About a year and a half ago, I started noticing I'm like getting, thin up here, which is, not terribly uncommon for a man of my age. But I wanted to do something about it, but I didn't want to take a drug. And so Nutrafol had approached us to sponsor us years and years ago. I had some of the bottles left over, and I started doing it. And Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand. It's trusted by over 1 million people. You will see thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. And I'll tell you, it is the case. At least for me. Thinning hair is different for men and women, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages, such as like postpartum or menopause or lifestyle factors, such as like a plant-based lifestyle, so you can get just what you need. Both Emma and I have friends, women, who have used Nutrafol with a lot of success. Physician formulated 100% drug-free ingredients. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. And here's the thing about Nutrafol. Most supplements that you take rely on ingredient studies. Nutrafol clinically tests their final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol men hair growth supplement for 6 months, and 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol women hair growth supplement for 6 months. Super easy to build a hair growth routine. You purchase online, no prescription required, automated deliveries, free shipping, keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and Headspace membership is also included. Cold, dry air of winter can be unforgiving, but your hair doesn't have to suffer. For a limited time, Nutrafol offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping. When you go to Nutrafol.com, enter the promo code TMR, find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. We'll put that in the podcast and YouTube and descriptions, as well as at majority.fm. Quick break. When we come back, Matt Duss, Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Want to welcome back to the program Matt Duss. He's Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy. Matt, it is very tempting to have you here when we're talking about foreign policy, just to say complete crap show and wrap up the interview. But I guess we should just go through the paces. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't we start with the vote in the UN today? Not terribly surprising, at least in terms of what the United States did. But we had 14 UN security countries vote in favor of an unconditional ceasefire, and the U.S. shut it down.
Right. No, again, I mean, what is there to say here? The administration has claimed to want a ceasefire. It became President Biden's policy as of May 31, when he, went out and publicly made this proposal. And yet they clearly continue not only to oppose, or I would just say this, they have refused to put any pressure, real pressure, impose any costs on Netanyahu for his ongoing efforts to prevent a ceasefire. That's what we see. And I think a UN resolution of this kind would have been one of those ways to impose costs. And yet they refuse. And I would just add, the tension here, or just the outright hypocrisy. Just a couple days ago, we saw the United States, the UN representative, criticizing Russia for blocking UN action on Ukraine. This is both, I think, morally and ethically wrong, but just in terms of U.S. credibility and U.S. leadership, it is enormously damaging to our ability to promote a more peaceful world.
Matt, will you just slide your microphone over? And as you do, there is a quality that feels like, to me, and we should also say, there's, Bernie Sanders is introducing some resolutions today. We'll talk about that in a moment, in terms of cutting weapons transfers to Israel. But there's a real quality out of the Biden administration that they are. This feels sort of like, and both with Ukraine and this, and with Ukraine, I can understand it on some level. Well, I guess I can understand on both levels, but there's a real quality of like hopping in the getaway car and just like, I don't know, unloading all of, I don't know what the metaphor is, but there seems to be like a fervor to this that is like as if, Joe Biden is sitting in there going like, I'm going to remake the Middle East, even if it only, even if I only have like 6 weeks to do it at this point.
No, I think that's right. And, let's take these two things separately. First, on Israel, I think a lot of people, in my view, wrongly, kind of overstated the extent to which Biden's policy on Gaza was driven politically. It was just this idea that if I pressure Israel, or if I'm not seen as supporting Israel fulsomely enough, the Democrats will take political damage. But I think what we see now, and I've always thought that was a bit wrong, I think clearly now, even after the election is over, this would be a moment to really impose costs, to put pressure on Israel. And these resolutions from Senator Sanders are a perfect way to do it. It's a way for the Biden administration to say, listen, this is coming from Congress, Netanyahu, you need to take some steps and take this ceasefire deal that you've been blocking for the past months. But we see it's not about that. It's about Joe Biden's deep-seated, unshakable ideological belief that the U.S. should just unconditionally support Israel in whatever it's doing, no matter how grotesque, no matter how violent and destructive. Now,
I mean, is this just about protecting Israel, or is it also a more comprehensive, like, is there an end game here? I mean, does Biden have an end game in mind outside of, well, you tell me. I mean, I can't, because I can project into like what Donald Trump's end game is to the extent that he has one. It's from Miriam Adelson, and it's honestly, it's we're going to annex the West Bank, and U.S. is going to sign off on it. There's going to be settlements in Gaza, and there's a hope that the Palestinian people essentially, become analogous to our indigenous people in this country and just sort of like lose their ability to inhibit our growth, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what Biden's is? Or is it also include some notion of like isolating Iran? Like, what's the end game here?
Yeah, I mean, first on Trump, I honestly don't think Trump cares that much. He just knows that Miriam Adelson gives him a lot of money and that right-wing Christian evangelicals vote for him. And these are things both of those groups want. So he's just going to hand this over to whomever, David Friedman or Jared Kushner, and let them handle it. Now, with Biden, as I said, it is just deeply ideological, but I do think, I'm not sure how much Biden himself, but clearly people around him like Brett McGurk, I think Jake Sullivan, Amos Hochstein, some of his closest advisors on this, seem to have this idea that, okay, well, Israel is deciding to continue to hit Hamas, they're hitting Hezbollah, they've hit Iran, and we're just going to kind of let them reshuffle the regional security deck in a way that's advantageous to them and potentially to us. And I think, the next time this kind of plan works will be the first. We have seen multiple efforts of precisely this kind. The Iraq War was an effort of this kind. Now, obviously, we had troops in the region, we invaded ourselves. It was different to that extent. But the basic logic, which is that, okay, we're just going to hit all of these groups, we're going to show strength, and then some things will happen and the situation will be more stable and more advantageous. But the long-term costs of this, I think, are going to be enormous. We're going to be dealing with this, the fallout from all of this for a generation.
Do you think they have some like scheme in their head? Because it feels like Saudi Arabia is already starting to shift their perspective on Iran. But do you think they have some type of like a perspective of, we just need some type of soft hegemony in that region, which will so that China does not have access to this oil, and we can basically, regardless of what price is associated with it or whatnot, obviously within reason, but basically we cordon this off. And this is, as we start to, enter into a new sort of potential Cold War, we need to have this area essentially.
Yeah, I think you just said the magic word here, which is China. China quickly has become the kind of focusing, like the lens through which all of U.S. foreign policy is now seen. Strategic competition with China. This shift started really under Trump, but the Biden administration really picked it up. And I think this is kind of the logic behind, the efforts to kind of have this tripartite U.S., Saudi, Israel deal that the Biden administration wasted, in my view, an enormous amount of time, energy, and resources trying to bring off. And the real focus of that, the real goal, was to box China out of the Middle East and to maintain the United States as the kind of regional security guarantor. And I think Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman has actually been very effective at sort of bidding the United States up. You go back a couple of years and you saw this Iran-Saudi détente that was, quote unquote, brokered by China, when in fact this had already essentially been negotiated. And they brought China in to take a few photos there at the end. Why? Who was the audience for that? It was Joe Biden. It was the United States, as if to say, listen, we can do stuff with China unless you're going to give us a better deal. Now, the real kind of what makes this so absurd is China actually has no real interest in supplanting the United States as the regional hegemon. Why in the world would they want that? They've watched the United States hemorrhaging resources and attention and capital and credibility over the past 3 decades plus. Why would they want a piece of that action? But basically, this is an effort a very successful effort by some of our client states and partner states to keep the United States engaged in the region in a way that benefits them.
But, my understanding is like this has been the agenda of neocons since the 1993, 92 Project for a New American Century document. I remember talking, I think I probably brought this up with you, with Gary Hart in 2004.
Yeah.
And him retelling, he was chairman with, I think it was Rudman, I can't remember who, a 21st century threats committee. And they went around it, and everybody was saying non-state actor, terrorist. One person said China. People all sort of laughed at that person. They came back 4 months ago. 4 months later, same thing. They went across non-state actors, China. They sort of laughed at that person. That person never came back to that. And it was, I think it was Lynn Cheney or Liz Cheney, who was sitting on that committee at the beginning. And then I also remember being stuck in Long Beach, California, going on they have like a aircraft carrier museum there or something. I can't remember. And the guy doing the tour was talking about the Asian pivot. So we were already moving and this must have been 2010 maybe or so. I mean, so this has been like broiling simmering under the surface, but this was the McGurk's opportunity and others to really sort of go whole hog, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think, you talk about these different individuals, and I think some of them have different focus. They have different emphasis. I mean, McGurk is a Middle East guy, very close to the Gulfies, whereas I think Sullivan is someone who takes the broader view, but they all kind of agree that the United States needs to sustain its role as the kind of Middle East security guarantor. And, you reference some of these meetings, these going back to the 90s, the Project for a New American Century. These ideas about American power that are deeply rooted in the post-Cold War unipolar moment. And obviously that moment is over.
Right.
It has been over for years. Washington is only now starting to get the memo. So I look at these policies, which are just still kind of operating from that system, operating for that mindset, and trying to just frantically sustain American power. And it's, it reminds me of that scene in Young Frankenstein where they're trying to put a tux on American primacy and teach it to sing Puttin' on the Ritz. It's not going to work, but we're going to waste a lot of time and energy and lives and resources trying to sustain it. And that's a tragedy.
How much does our Ukraine policy, what's your anticipation before we move on to Ukraine? How do you anticipate this vote going down in the Senate today?
I mean, I think it won't pass. I mean, you will have one vote. I mean, each of these, there's 3 different joint resolutions of disapproval, each addressing a different form of arms that's being supplied. And each one will come up for, Senator Sanders will make a motion to put it on the floor for a vote. Then there will be a motion to table, to put it aside, and that will win. Each of these will not go forward. So the question is, how many Democrats can you get to vote for it? I'd say if we get 10, even 12, I think that's a good outcome. I wish we could get more, because this is really not a question of, I know that, the forces on the right want to make this about do we or don't we support Israel. That's not what this is about. This is about, are we upholding the law with regard to how these weapons supplied by American taxpayers are being used. And we have just incontrovertible evidence that these weapons have been used over the past year in ways that egregiously violate human rights and international humanitarian law.
And we should also include in that, like these arms sales are under the Leahy law, conditioned upon who we sell them to not inhibit U.S. Aid or any aid for that matter. And they're clearly breaching that, even by the administration's own standards, as they set out in that letter, 2 weeks before the election. Let's talk about Ukraine, where this also feels like Biden thinks he has 2 months or a month and a half at this point, and they're literally throwing the kitchen sink at Russia. Is this an attempt to basically give Ukraine some leverage for when Trump comes in, or what?
I think it is. And again, my issue I have 2 issues with it. One is I just haven't heard anyone explain to me how this changes the outcome or in any real way. I mean, sure, I think it does make sense that, listen, these attacks are being launched on Ukraine from Russian soil. It makes sense that Ukraine should have the right, the freedom to respond to attack inside Russia where these attacks on their territory are being made. But again, I think I would appreciate hearing how this kind of material changes the outcome. The theory of the case that the Biden administration has had from the beginning, which I think is sound, is we're going to support Ukraine's defense in such a way that puts them in the best possible position around the eventual negotiating table. I still think that's sound. I don't know how this helps that. Clearly, Putin seems very happy just to wait a few months until Trump's in office, where he knows he's going to get a potentially much better deal. Or, you know, any number of options could arise for him in that situation. And I will also say this. I mean, yes, Joe Biden is still the president. He is the president for a couple more months. But I do think it's worth acknowledging that Trump was elected having promised to bring this war to an end. I have very serious concerns about the manner in which Trump is going to do that, what kind of concessions he will force upon Ukraine in order to get that, you know, that ceasefire or that so-called peace. And now for Biden to choose in these remaining months of the lame duck, which is his right to do, but to choose to do that, to escalate, you know, after Trump has just been elected, having promised to de-escalate, that makes me a little uncomfortable, I have to say.
It is amazing to me that he feels comfortable sitting down with Trump, you know, gleefully or even, you know, drearily welcoming him to the White House, which, you know, Trump has clearly set the precedent that you don't have to do that. But so Biden sitting there protecting those norms, but at the same time, in far more material things, not just symbolic, is like, you know, is escalating this, and with the full knowledge that all it can do really at the end of the day is, because Trump has now won, all it can really do is potentially go very, very sideways, but really could have no other impact down the road. Trump's policy going forward, just briefly, because we'll spend more time on this in the future, but what do you anticipate? I mean, with a guy like, I mean, I don't know what to say about Hegseth, but Rubio, Secretary of State.
Yeah, I think that surprised some people because Rubio had been one of the most hardcore neocons in the Senate. But, you know, I was in Berlin just last week talking with some colleagues, some members of the political parties, and they were very curious and obviously very anxious about what Trump was going to bring. And they almost took some comfort from the Rubio nomination because, you know, neoconservatism is at least part of the so-called consensus that they recognize, they understand it, agree or disagree. And I caution them to say, like, no, this does not mean that Trump is a neocon. This means that Marco Rubio has been housebroken. Because that is the overriding imperative. That is the key kind of qualification for any of these nominees, is that they are absolutely loyal to Trump. They have total fealty, because Trump learned the first time around that if you bring in these people who have their own ideas or who know, you know, how the different bureaus and institutions work, they can kind of frustrate and put the brakes on some of his whims. And he is making absolutely sure that that will not happen this time. So he's bringing in people who will execute on everything he wants to do. Now, what will he want to do? It depends what he sees on TV in the morning. It depends, I guess, who gets in his ear at any given time to convince him of the right course of action. So that kind of reckless and dangerous unpredictability will still exist, but it's hard to say that there's much of a coherent ideology here beyond, as always, the glorification of Donald Trump. Now, you know, he ran, interestingly, toward the end of the campaign, and I think this should be a lesson for Democrats. He and Vance both leaned in very hard to the anti-war message because, unfortunately, the Democrats had left that lane wide open for them in a number of ways. As in the first term, I don't think they're going to follow through on that. I think we're going to see, you know, Trump finding ways to escalate, perhaps not, or probably not in sending troops, but let's remember, we came very close to open war both with North Korea and with Iran during the first Trump administration because of Trump's unpredictability. I think we really got lucky a number of times. I don't know how long our luck will last here.
Well, I think the only thing I can say is I think you're doing Trump dirty by not recognizing that he also probably wants to enrich himself. And there's a
Yeah.
so it's not just whim. There is an agenda. I think if he sees an opportunity to increase his family's wealth, I think that will happen.
I will hold myself accountable for that oversight. Thank you.
Yes. Well, next time we'll do a full accounting. Matt Duss, always a pleasure. We will talk to you again soon, I am sure. Executive Vice President, the Center for International Policy. Thanks again. Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Gregg Gonsalves, Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Yale University. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. I want to welcome to the program Gregg Gonsalves. He is a professor of epidemiology at Yale University. Wrote a piece 8 days ago before RFK Jr. was, I guess, publicly nominated, I don't know if officially, by Donald Trump to lead HHS, Health and Human Services. And before Dr. Oz of TV fame was named to be CMS chief. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Let's talk about this. And I should say, I used to work with Bobby Kennedy, and his the anti-vax stuff had sort of peaked in like 2005 and then sort of simmered for years until probably about 10 years ago. And let's just start, I guess, with sort of like, let's start with this. The food videos he's been putting out, where he's talking about whole grain foods. I mean, give me your sense of like the value of that. Because I know that there's a quality of like, come for the whole foods, stay for the hepatitis and the HPV, I guess. But what's your sense of that element before we get on to sort of like the public health aspect, or to the extent that is public health?
It is all is public health. Even his prior work with river keepers and river cleanup, which I remember from being a citizen of resident in New York City for a long time, was public health. It was environmental health. But the point is that you have to take Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a whole, right? We can pick and choose and say, oh yeah, processed foods, nobody should really maintain a diet based on, McDonald's and Burger King. It makes sense. But then as you start to widen the lens out, you realize we have a big problem here, because many of his views are, I wouldn't call them, I don't think it's accurate to call them controversial or out of the mainstream. They're just untrue. And often dangerous. So, some of the bits and pieces of what he thinks about may have kernels of truth in them, but the bigger picture paints a dangerous ideologue getting ready to assume the secretary role at Health and Human Services.
Let's talk about like let's start, I guess, with fluoride. He's recently come out with I guess saying on, he claimed that on, the day after the inauguration, they're going to get rid of the fluoride from our drinking supply. This is really a throwback, because I hadn't heard this in maybe 20 or 30 years, really go mainstream, this idea about fluoride. This is like chemtrails sort of level of discourse. But walk us through this, the fluoride issue.
So a couple of things. One is, I'm not old enough to remember, but in the 1950s, fluoridation was part of a big communist plot, right? It was really considered very subversive by the far right. And part of me probably hears echoes of what he's talking about in those long ago fantasies of the Red Menace. Look, fluoridation in the water is common in some places, uncommon in other places. What is untrue is that he makes sort of broad claims about the dangers of fluoride, which can be apparent at high doses, which none of us would imbibe in our tap water, and makes that the sort of forefront of his sort of campaign against fluoridation. The amount of fluoride in the drinking water is really, really negligible in terms of the side effects it can cause. And some people pointed to papers and reports that at double the dose, there may be some questions about cognitive development in children and stuff like that. But that's at like double the dose that we see in drinking water. So the currently available doses in drinking water, there are no significant problems in terms of the consensus of the scientific literature. We take more fluoride out of water than we put in. There are many places around the country out west where we're dealing with having to drill new wells because there's too much fluoride in the water. This is taken very, very seriously by the federal agencies that supervise this. There's been some suggestion by Lena Wen in the Washington Post last week that maybe he has a point on fluoride. Europe doesn't fluoridate its water. But Europe also has the highest level of dental caries across the WHO region. So fluoride has been a very important public health intervention in preventing tooth decay in children. We have other access to fluoride through fluoride toothpaste and other sort of vehicles for fluoride introduction into our dental hygiene. But this is not an issue that anybody should really be too concerned about. And again, he takes something that may have a scintilla of truth in it in the context of an enormous dose of fluoride and turns it into this, broad-based sort of environmental poison.
And we should say, like 50% of fluoride intake that you get, like you say, it's from our water supply, half of levels that even, on a consistent basis, there was some correlation. And that study that came out, I don't know, 8 months ago or so is not nearly as definitive as people like to make it. But my understanding is half of the fluoride that we ingest leaves our body within 24 hours. The rest is in our bones and teeth where we want it. And the other note I would make about Europe is that those countries have much wider access to dental care than we have in this country. Exactly. And if you pull the fluoride out of water, the first cohort of people who are going to have real serious dental issues, and we should say that's a real health issue. I mean, the stories of kids getting infections and it killing them, literally, will be people living in poverty. I mean, this is who's going to get hit by something like this. They did this in Calgary, you wrote as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's an observation that Calgary pulled fluoride out of its drinking water several years ago. Now they're putting it back in next year. What they saw is an increase in cavities, infections associated with severe dental decay among kids, needing to put them under anesthesia and under antibiotics for infections. Look, we can have an educated, evidence-based discussion about dental care in the U.S., from fluoridation to the availability of dental services across the country. Remember, most health insurance doesn't pay for dental care. But this is not the conversation that we need to have as a nation about whether it causes cancer or other sorts of serious health events when it simply isn't true.
Let's talk about vaccinations. I mean, I think, this audience is very familiar with Kennedy saying, when I run into people on a hiking trail, I'll tell them not to vaccinate their kids, and hopefully they'll hear it enough times that maybe they'll hesitate to do it. He said that vaccinations he does not consider safe. He's made proclamations like, well, we don't need to make vaccines mandatory. If a vaccine works for you, then, you can still have access to it. But that's not what public health is. Can you walk us through at least conceptually what public health is?
Well, that's a big ask, but we can talk about it in the context of vaccines. We've seen whooping cough, measles outbreaks across the country, right? And by and large, they're associated with a decrease in vaccine coverage across a population to a level in which herd immunity, the ability not just for you to protect yourself with a vaccine, but to protect your neighbors with a vaccine is gone under. And so you've seen it in religious communities in the U.S. You've seen it, to be fair, this is not only a sort of far right obsession. You see it in the context of liberal enclaves like Vashon Island in Seattle, in which rich liberal enclave. So if we're going to protect ourselves with vaccination, it means that you have to get vaccinated and I have to get vaccinated. We need everybody around us to be vaccinated to protect us against measles outbreaks, diphtheria outbreaks, etc. And one thing is he may frame as an issue of personal choice. But when you have a measles outbreak that happens in a community, there are millions of dollars that happen in terms of healthcare costs, cleaning up that mess, in addition to the pain and suffering of the families involved. And so he's socializing his own personal preferences and making us bear the risks, right? So the community bears the risks of what is supposed to be our personal choice to you do you version of public health that's been popular a little bit in certain circles.
Talk about the notion of public health in the context of there are, like any medication or any medical procedure, there are risks, right? I don't know if there's any medication you can take that is 100% safe, across the board. Certainly no medical procedure that you can take is 100% safe. But the idea is that good health weighs these risks. And in the context of public health policy, there are, of course, people who are going to have side effects, sometimes severe, to any vaccination or any medication. But the idea is that the number of lives who are at risk by this versus those who would be at risk if we do not provide, let's say, vaccinations. But this could apply to other, sort of like procedures. There's some risk in getting a colonoscopy, but you're going to save much more lives than you will lose across a population. That's there seems to be like some like complete deficit of thinking in that way, or an ideological one that is basically saying like we can't have this concept of public health.
So a couple of things. One is if you get a colonoscopy or I don't get a colonoscopy, that's a personal choice, right? I'm not going to give somebody else cancer by my decision not to have a colonoscopy. But again, we are transferring the social cost, the economic cost of my cancer diagnosis onto the general public because it gets paid for by taxpayers, by increasing healthcare premiums. But that's in the context of medical care. In the context of public health interventions, we do these because they have broad-based effects on each other. Vaccines don't just affect you; they affect the community you live in. As you said, everything has side effects. And as they say in toxicology, dosage is the poison, right? If you have high doses of anything, you're liable to get into trouble. But in the context of fluoridation, we have very, very few pretty small doses of fluoride in the water. In terms of vaccination, yes, there are side effects of vaccines. People have been seriously affected by vaccines. That being said, when you broaden the lens out and you look at the millions and millions of people who've taken vaccines around the country, by and large, the vaccines we take are safe and effective, and really transformed American healthcare. My dad had polio, right? He was born in 1929. By 31, 32, he had polio, and he could have died, right? And he suffered the consequences of that infection for the rest of his life. I am sure if my dad was alive today and said, "Would you rather have not had polio?" I think he would have said yes, right? Nobody seems to remember those days when schools would close, when community centers would be shuttered because polio was rolling through town. We do not want to go back to the bad old days where we saw measles, mumps, rubella, polio, other kinds of infections race through our communities, creating havoc both personally and socially.
And much of this, much of the traction that Kennedy got was because of COVID, frankly. I mean, had we not had a pandemic, had we not rolled out vaccinations for this, I think he would have had much less traction. This was very, very helpful for him, I think, in terms of like his career aspirations. There are now reports of, I think, a third person infected with the bird flu, H1N5, is it? And that there is reason to believe this was not from contact directly with an animal, that it was either through, maybe raw milk or through contact with a human being. And I know that there's some reports coming out of Canada as well that what can you tell us about this and the potential implications of having somebody who does not believe in, I don't know how much he believed, frankly, in COVID as a real sort of threat to people, despite the fact that, 1.5 million people die in this country. But give me your assessment, both of what we're seeing in the past week or two in the bird flu and the implications of having someone like Bobby Kennedy at the head of HHS at that point.
Well, first of all, we know he has sort of bizarre views on COVID being sort of a plot to spare Chinese and Ashkenazi Jews. So really, Bobby? The other piece of this is that, we had a once in a century pandemic with COVID-19 and bird flu, H5N1, appearance in livestock and other kinds of animals across the U.S. is pretty concerning. It's spreading widely across herds and other sources of sort of animal infection. As you said, we're starting to see some people who have said they had no contact with farm animals and have had the disease. We don't see any proof that the virus has figured out how to jump from person to person. That would be an extremely worrisome development. That being said, we're seeing it show up in pigs where recombination is common and passing from animal species to animal species. So we don't want to get to that threshold where we start seeing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 human to human cases in which no animal contact has been reported. We haven't seen that yet. But what do you do if we have an outbreak of H5N1 in the US? Are we going to be prepared to deal with this in the context of an HHS, which is run by people who have no relevant expertise? Take the controversies and the conspiracies off the table. Bobby Kennedy has no expertise in dealing with these issues, nor do many of the people he's putting into posts that President Trump is reputedly putting into posts across the sort of federal bureaucracy in terms of health.
And so I just the Canadian the teenager, I don't know if you're familiar with that over the past I guess day or two, we're not at a strain that could go human to human yet. Is that, I just want to.
Yeah, no, when that happens, you'll hear all about it, right? People are worried about the kinds of mutations they're seeing in the virus. They're worried about the sort of persistent spread in animals. You don't want to give a virus time to replicate and develop mutations over and over and over again, moving from species to species. It starts to develop a breadth of affinity for different receptors in different species, and we don't want to be in the situation where it finally figures out how to jump from human to human. The point is, we're not prepared. Even during to be fair to the incoming administration, the current administration has not sort of dealt with what's happening with the requisite outbreak. We've unable to get a handle on how many herds are infected, how many animals are infected, what's going on in our communities, because we can't do the active surveillance that's necessary to document what's going on.
How, from your perspective, has there been any serious attempt or success at sort of reinvigorating the system? I know that when Trump got in, he downgraded, a position that would have alerted him to what was happening with COVID-19 earlier. I know that there were sort of like CDC outposts that were in China that were shut down as part of this. Has there been any reinvigoration of this system in the event that we end up having 2 once in 100-year pandemics within less than 100 years?
The short answer is no. basically at the end of the public health emergencies a couple of years ago, all the money that was flowing to health departments to do sort of extraordinary activities in the context of COVID-19 are gone, right? And it's not like the U.S. Congress has ever really given CDC, which sends most of its money out to local and state health departments, the kind of funding it needs to do its job. It's been beaten up by politicians on both sides. And so we're in a situation where you could make the case that local and state health departments, our federal public health bureaucracy, is weaker than it was in 2019 when it was weak to begin with. So we've had attrition of talented staff from many of these agencies, both at the state and local and federal level. And so I'm really, really worried that, God forbid we see something else happen. And it doesn't have to be H5N1. It could be something we aren't even sort of thinking about right now happen over the next 4 years. We'll be in trouble. But in general, our health in the United States is terrible. We're 44th in life expectancy compared to other countries around the world. It's getting worse. We're down to 60th on that list by 2040. And so it's not just these sort of once in a lifetime events we have to worry about. We need to lift up the health of all Americans, and the way RFK Jr. talks about it is not going to help us get to that goal.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any type of recognition of a structural problem in the way that we deliver healthcare. It all seems to be sort of like a weird whack-a-mole, depending on, I don't know, what's on Coast to Coast that night or something. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if that show still exists. Gregg Gonsalves, Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Yale University. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we won't have to call on you again to give an update on anything that appears to be problematic outside of, the insanity we'll see from a RFK at HHS, if that happens.
I hope not. Let's cross our fingers.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks. I wish we were a little bit cheerier, but we're going to go into the fun half and have some fun. Joining us in the fun half at the top of show is going to be Mike from PA, from Central Committee on Twitch. Is that how you say that? Central Committee?
Pretty sure, yeah.
That's the name of the show. And he will join us. He's a guy who called into the show right around this time 8 years ago. Maybe even a little bit earlier, and talked about Pennsylvania. We will talk to him in a minute. Also, just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you insulate us from the vagaries of the market. You insulate us from the vagaries of potential attacks launched by right-wingers and others who don't like what we're covering. You insulate us from things like, the day-to-day demonetization that happens when you cover stuff that advertisers are just not that interested in. And frankly, it is our members who, when we get that demonetization notice, make us say, well, what are you going to do? We're going to do this stuff regardless. So become a member today. Join themajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee and hot chocolate. Traceable, great coffee. You can also get the Majority Report blend. Here it is. But they have a bunch of others, all sorts of different types of coffee, delicious stuff. Great company, great to their providers and their suppliers. You can track all of how much they pay and who they support. Justcoffee.coop. Bradley, what's happening on ESVN?
We broke down the Week 11 action on ESPN on Monday, and for the week ahead, we will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. to give our picks against the spread for the weekend's action of NFL games. So go to youtube.com/ESPN show then for our live stream tomorrow, or you can go there and check out some of our prior streams and clips as well.
Too bad about the Cavaliers. No
I know,
longer
undefeated no more.
Great game. Al Horford, amazing. Dizzle McFizzle says, yes, I pay $10 a month for daily panic attacks. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I know. At
least you get to have them like sort of communally, electronically with a lot of other people across the country.
Yes. I mean, look, we're going to have to, we're going to have to steel ourselves to this stuff so that we can move forward and, attempt to do what we can do in moments when we can do. And we don't know when those moments are going to come up. So it's going to be rough. No lie. Matt, what's happening on your joyous show?
Last night, we had Ryan Grimm on to talk about the situation of the squad, taking stock, and what it might mean going forward. So we talked about AOC, Talib, and Bowman and Bush particularly. So check that out, patreon.com/leftreckoning.
All right, quick break. We'll be right back with the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy.
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are